Next on the Daily Ledger, nuclear inspectors strike out, disturbing revelations on the Iran agreement, and sounding the alarm.
The deal allows Iran in about a decade to have a much greater number of even faster, more effective centrifuges than they have today. This will enable Iran to have the capacity to produce the enriched uranium for an entire nuclear arsenal.
Also, the emergence of an unlikely GOP alliance. Ted Cruz and Donald Trump meet behind closed doors, and Cruz speaks out on principles.
You know, for any conservative, we're going to talk about welfare reform. We're going to talk about helping people get off government dependency and back on their own feet. Then we need to start with getting giant corporations off of dependency on the government at the expense of the taxpayers.
Plus, terror in Tennessee. A lone gunman opens fire on our men and women in uniform.
Anytime there is a killing like this, all of us, stigmatized, as a Muslim, and we are, looked up and down for, by other people. But we do not condone those kind of killing. There should be no killing, absolutely no killing in the name of Islam. Anybody has told you, anybody who's killing in the name of Islam is doing that only for his own agenda.
And the continuing rampant fraud and theft of our tax dollars, courtesy of Obamacare. Stand by. The doors to the newsroom are locked and the PC police are not getting in. So sit back and relax as we unfold today's edition of the Daily Ledger. Hello, everyone. I'm Wendy Patrick. Welcome to the Daily Ledger. Graham Ledger has the day off. Our cover story, nuclear Iran, another day, another dangerous concession revealed. Under the deal, no American inspectors will be allowed to enter Iran's nuclear sites. Only countries with normal diplomatic relations with Iran will participate in inspections organized by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Opponents of the deal say only American inspectors can be trusted to verify Iran isn't cheating on the agreement by trying to operate secret nuclear facilities. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a staunch critic of the nuclear deal with Iran, is laying out what really should be done to deal with the terrorist state. This, as other Middle East leaders remain cautiously optimistic.
The deal agreed to in Vienna, I regret to say, paves this terrorist regime's path to the bomb. The alternative to this bad deal is not war. The alternative is a better deal that would roll back Iran's military nuclear program and tie the easing of restrictions on Iran's nuclear program to changes in Iran's behavior. That's the kind of deal that would be welcomed in Tel Aviv and here in Israel's capital, Jerusalem.
We all look forward to an agreement that prevents Iran from acquiring a nuclear capability, that has a robust and continuous inspections regime to make sure that Iran does not violate the terms of the agreement, and that has an effective and quick snapback provision that allows the reimposition of sanctions against Iran should it violate the terms of that agreement.
Meantime, President Obama is pushing hard to get his deal approved. He's facing bipartisan opposition to his decision to submit the nuclear accord to the United Nations before Congress votes on the agreement. Obama is also threatening to veto any congressional override. Joining me now from our bureau in Washington, D.C., Frontiers of Freedom Communications Director Travis Corson. Travis, what are your thoughts on this deal?
Neville Chamberlain's Peace in Our Time is what immediately comes to mind. For those who don't know, that was the concessions that were made to the Germans in the 1930s and ultimately ended up leading to the Second World War. I think it's a bad deal for the world, a bad deal that America made. It doesn't stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, but as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, and I think he hit the nail on the head, it paves the way for them. It merely delays it out in exchange for lifting the sanctions that made it more difficult for them to pursue their program and, frankly, brought them to the negotiating table to begin with.
Travis, the embargo on small arms will be lifted in 5 years, and then, of course, they'll be able to get ballistic missile technology in 8 years. What do you think about that?
That is one of my biggest concerns of this deal, and something that our military commanders have reiterated. One of the Joint Chiefs actually said that under no circumstances should either one of those embargoes be lifted. And frankly, again, when you talk about paving the way, ballistic missiles are used for two things. They're used for conventional payloads, but even more importantly, they are used to deliver nuclear payloads. That being said, it again paves the way where Iran uses these different keystones and milestones and these different lifting of these different sanctions in order to pave the way and get that program. That being said, I think both America and some of our allies in the region need to be looking at stronger missile defense programs as a response to that.
It seems that Iran got everything they wanted with this deal. But how is this deal good for the U.S. and for the world in general?
I really can't see a good part in this deal for the U.S. and the world in general. I mean, I guess the one thing that you could say is that it kind of has woken our allies up, unfortunately, to where the foreign policy of this administration really lies and where they're going to show favor. But you know, I think it's caused a repriority of defense needs. And again, first among them, I think, is going to be that missile defense.
Do you think Congress is going to try to derail this deal, or are they going to cave?
Well, there are three options that Congress is currently looking at. There's obviously the resolution of disapproval, which I think does have the votes in both chambers to pass because opposition to this deal is bipartisan. There's a second one that's being floated in the Senate, which I'm not necessarily a big fan of, but is the thought that is to allow the motion to accept the deal to come to the Senate floor and basically hang it around the neck of the Democrats in 2016 as an election issue. And a third option is to actually, in spite of the deal, levy additional sanctions upon Iran, specifically through a piece of legislation that Senators Corker and Menendez, again, a bipartisan piece of legislation, would pave the way for additional sanctions. So there are a couple different options, but I do think there are the votes in both chambers at least to get the resolution to the president's desk. The more important vote here is overriding the veto on that resolution of disapproval.
Okay, and what are the chances you think they can get that two-thirds majority to override that veto?
Unfortunately, even though the opposition is very strong to this deal, I think the senator will be able to cobble together 34, the president rather, will be able to cobble together 34 votes in the Senate. Minority Leader Pelosi in the House is also putting her weight behind this deal. So I think she'd be able to get enough votes in the House. But really, it'll be interesting to see where Chuck Schumer, the presumptive minority leader in the Senate, or the new leader after Harry Reid retires in 2 years, where he falls on this, because that may make the vote very tight and very interesting in the Senate, depending on where he ultimately falls in the deal. And he's facing a lot of pressure from both sides.
Travis, I got to ask you, do you think that Israel is going to stand back as an emboldened Iran moves closer to a bomb?
There are a lot of concerns for Israel here. Obviously, we talked about the missiles, the ballistic missiles, and Israel would probably be the first target that Iran would point those missiles towards. So they should make sure they're making investments in their Iron Dome and systems, and more importantly, in systems like the Patriot missile system, which is actually designed specifically to shoot down some of these ICBMs. They worked very well against the Scuds in the first Gulf War. But also of concern is basically with the arms embargo being lifted, what that is going to mean for some of their proxies in the region. Hamas, Hezbollah, with the ability to not only export arms, but to have more funds that they can use to fund these groups, it very likely could become a destabilizing influence in the region. And again, a lot of those proxy groups, Israel would be one of the first nations that they would likely turn their attention on and try to attack.
Travis, thank you for joining us. Coming up next, politics and strange bedfellows. Plus, an attack on our military as shots ring out in Chattanooga.
A shot, and then it was a pause for about 2 seconds, and then it was just shot, 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 shot.
Page 2 now, an apparent emerging GOP alliance, Senator Ted Cruz and business mogul Donald Trump. Both candidates for the presidency met behind closed doors this week. Republican strategists have theories about the nature of their relationship. Some believe Trump's blunt statements on hot-button issues may be stealing some of Cruz's thunder. Political insiders say Cruz is the GOP candidate hurt most by Trump's run. Senator Cruz is trying to distance himself from the pack, calling out his fellow Republicans, urging them to stand on principle.
You know, in campaign seasons, every Republican is a conservative. There are a lot of campaign conservatives in the United States Congress. Well, now's when push comes to shove, where we discover if people are merely campaign conservatives or they actually are going to be practicing conservatives, consistent conservatives. You know, for any conservative, if we're going to talk about welfare reform, if we're going to talk about helping people get off government dependency and back on their own feet, then we need to start with getting giant corporations off of dependency on the government at the expense of the taxpayers.
Both Cruz and Trump are finding success in connecting with the public. Both are gaining traction with tough talk on illegal immigration and combating big government. Trump is trending well in the polls, but it's questionable how long he'll last as a candidate. Could it be Cruz is looking at a long-term strategy to win over Trump supporters? Joining me now from Washington, D.C., political reporter at Washington Examiner, Gabriella Morangello. Hi, Gabriella.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. What are your thoughts on this Trump-Cruz alliance?
Well, Donald Trump has previously contributed to Ted Cruz's leadership PAC in the amount of $5,000. He has a great deal of respect for the Texas senator, but he has taken Cruz's rhetoric, he's dumbed it down, and he's made it his own. And the same can be said for Ted Cruz. He also has a great deal of respect for Donald Trump. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of speculation going on among Republican strategists and Republicans in general about the nature of these two candidates' relationship and whether or not Trump's recent success is helping or hurting Ted Cruz. And presumably it's the latter, because what we've seen happen recently is Donald Trump shoot up in the polls while Ted Cruz has struggled to make any headway.
And how do you think that's happening? How is Donald Trump stealing Ted Cruz's thunder?
Well, candidates like Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Marco Rubio and Rand Paul and any of the governors who are running are constantly thinking about what they're saying. They have to be mindful of the remarks and their delivery because they will have to seek re-election at some point. And at the same time, Donald Trump, he has a real estate empire to fall back on. He's not a career politician. He's not a politician in general. And he can be out there, he can be making these off-the-cuff remarks and be carrying himself with this unapologetic demeanor. And that's what's really appealing to a lot of Americans right now, as we've seen proven with his rise in the polls.
Well, as you mentioned, Trump never backs down. He doubles down, sometimes triples down. We've all seen that. So what do you think Ted Cruz needs to do to pick up his numbers in the polls?
Well, I think Ted Cruz right now, he isn't blind to what's happening with Donald Trump. And if anything, he seems a little bit at ease with what's going on because what he and what some of his campaign aides and what some strategists have said is that if and when Donald Trump does back out of the race or does, is eliminated by a poor performance in the upcoming debates, whether or not that happens, he could potentially be a significant asset to the Cruz campaign. He could be a donor. He could also serve as an endorsement for Ted Cruz. So I think with the meeting that we just saw, in a way, Ted Cruz is cozying up to Donald Trump, realizing that that may soon become the case.
You know, everybody's talking about this prediction that Donald Trump is going to, at some point, pull out of the race. Do you think that's true?
Well, I wouldn't cast him aside right now. I think it remains to be seen, depending on what his performance is in the upcoming debate on August 4th. What we've seen and what we've heard, particularly from Peggy Noonan out of the Wall Street Journal, what she's predicted is that Donald Trump will get on stage with these other candidates and he'll essentially be a squid. He won't know how to handle himself among a number of governors and senators who constantly have to talk about the details of their policies and legislation. So that should be interesting, and I think that'll determine how sustainable his campaign is so far.
But he's going to suck all the oxygen out of the room as he does it. That's the other thing we keep hearing about this upcoming debate. Let me ask you, some say that Trump is hurting the GOP. Is that true?
That remains to be determined. I think we'll see once we get to the upcoming debate, whether or not he actually does have policies of his own, substantial policies to offer and things of substance. Right now, he has certainly made some remarks that have caused controversy, but he is getting Americans to talk about a number of issues, including immigration. And that has allowed a number of Republican candidates to then take their own platforms and address immigration and deliver their policy proposals. So perhaps he has alienated some voters and some demographics with these remarks, but at the same time, he's giving his fellow candidates a platform to produce their ideas on a number of topics.
What does Donald Trump need to do to become the nominee who can defeat Hillary?
Well, he needs to appeal to the demographics that he'll need to win the presidency, and that is Latino voters, African-American voters, Jewish Americans, and most importantly, millennials. We saw millennials turn out in droves for President Obama in both 2008 and 2012, and we've seen them overwhelmingly support Hillary Clinton so far. So Donald Trump will need to somehow adapt his rhetoric and his campaign messaging to appeal to those voters. And he could potentially do that if he is able to scale back his delivery and not be so bombastic with his demeanor. But we'll see. We'll see how he performs, especially given his performance in the upcoming debate. If he can back up what he's been saying with policies that are expected to work when implemented, then I think he will continue to do well.
Those are great points. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up next, more details surfacing about the tragedy in Tennessee as the Daily Ledger continues. Page 3 now. Terror in Tennessee. A gunman opened fire on 2 U.S. military sites near Chattanooga Thursday, killing 4 Marines and wounding at least 3 others: a police officer, a Marine Corps recruiter, and a sailor. Witnesses say the shooter, 24-year-old Mohammed Yusuf Abdulaziz, used his AK-47, spraying bullets into a strip mall military recruiting center. He then drove 7 miles, attacking a support center operated by the U.S. Navy.
Our nation mourns the senseless loss of 4 of our nation's heroes, and another one lays in very serious condition here in a local hospital. Also today, one of our great men in blue is wounded.
He took a shot, and then it was a pause for about 2 seconds, and then it was just shot, 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 shot.
As he started his shooting over at the recruitment center on Lee Highway, moved from there. We do not believe he exited his vehicle at Lee Highway. We believe he shot from inside the vehicle, moved over to the Naval/Marine Corps center here on the other side, about 15 miles away, where he did enter the facility, exited his vehicle, and engaged in gunfire there. There's no indication at this point that anybody else was involved. Obviously, we're still at the beginning of this investigation. We will explore any possibility, and that includes whether or not anyone else was involved in this.
Police shot and killed the gunman. Investigators have released few details about the shooter, but some details have started to surface about his past. Joining me now, attorney and legal analyst Jan Ronis. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you.
So what do we know about this man so far? Was this a lone wolf attack?
Well, listen, these reports sometimes trickle in slowly, but it has the appearance of a lone wolf kind of an attack. It doesn't seem to be related to mental health issues. It looks like preliminary reports, and these reports, as I mentioned earlier, preliminary, and they may change, that he may have been indoctrinated in his foreign travels to come back and commit this awful, terrible crime.
What do we know about his religious background? Is he a religious fanatic?
Well, I mean, I've seen reports both ways. I mean, listen, there are a lot of religious fanatics running around the world today, and a lot of these religious fanatics are traveling to foreign lands and becoming, more indoctrinated in these non-mainstream kinds of religions, and many of them are being dispatched to foreign lands, including this country, to commit these horrific acts, which probably are acts of terror. It's all preliminary, but that's what it looks like at this point. I don't see this as a mental health issue. I don't particularly see this as a gun control issue. You know, the United States is in a tough position to try to deal with this. What do we do? Do we put a camera in every home? Do we put a tap on every telephone? Do we put a cop in every corner? You know, from a national security point of view, it gives us some tough choices.
And Jan, did this young man appear to have become self-radicalized, or was he affiliated with some kind of an extremist group?
You know, when you are called upon to evaluate these kinds of things, you sometimes draw upon past experience when other people, for example, the Boston bombers appeared to have been radicalized by foreign travels and by communicating with these radical Islamist groups. You know, you get to the conclusion that perhaps that's what happened here, but again, without more facts, we don't know, but that's what it looks like. I'm certainly open to that as a likely probability of how he became so radicalized.
And speaking of foreign travel, we understand he was born elsewhere but grew up here for the most part. What do we know at this point about him possibly having traveled abroad and becoming radicalized there?
Well, I have seen reports that he traveled to some Middle East countries, all of which have radical ties and all of which have exported the radical Islam all around the world. So, I mean, it appears to have the same similar footprints as to, say, for example, the Boston bombing. It's certainly unrelated to, you know, the Aurora shootings. It appears to be unrelated to the shooting in South Carolina in the church several weeks ago. All of these crimes are different. Some of them have common denominators. There does appear to be a common denominator between this and other acts of terror. For example, Fort Hood, you know, and it seemed to have common denominator, radical Islam, targeting American interests. And so, but again, all this is preliminary, but looks suspicious.
It sure does, Jan. And when you talk about common denominators, how much deliberate strategy and planning at this point appears to have gone into the shooting yesterday?
Well, in the absence, look, even if he had mental health issues, which it doesn't appear as though he did, imagine the planning it would take to assemble this kind of an arsenal, this much ammunition, these awful guns, and then, you know, commit these horrific crimes separated by many miles. I mean, certainly it took a lot of planning, it took a lot of hatred, it took a lot of audacity. You know, it's mind-boggling that one person could commit such carnage in such a short period of time and affect so many thousands of lives, and yet give to the United States another reason to be anguished and having to memorialize these, you know, fallen victims. It's just another crisis in a long series of crises that this nation seems to have faced all too often.
Oh, it sure does. And Jan, what do we know about why he targeted the military?
Well, at this point, you know, we have conflicting reports, but again, as I mentioned, it appears to have the common denominator of many of these terrorist kinds of attacks. If in fact this was a terrorist act of a person going to a foreign land, become more radicalized than they really are, taking out their anger, their misguided anger and misguided philosophies on America that stands for so many good things. It just appears to have, again, the same kind of footprint as so many of these other incidents we've seen. Again, as I mentioned, it appears to look like the Fort Hood situation. It appears to have many of the common denominator factors of the Boston bombing. And again, we have another radicalized young Islamic militant coming to this country and committing horrific acts of carnage and mayhem.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jan, for your insight.
My
Appreciate it. Coming up, Hillary heckled by what should have been a friendly crowd. But first, the best of Stop the Tape. Obama forcing affirmative action in your neighborhood.
We're using data on housing and neighborhood conditions to help cities identify the areas that need the most help.
Page 5 now. Obamacare for illegal immigrants. It may be happening soon in the Golden State, thanks to a bill known as the Health for All Act. This, despite the fact that illegal immigrants were supposed to be excluded from President Obama's signature health care law. California State Senator Ricardo Lara is spearheading the bill, but he hasn't discussed the cost of expanding Medi-Cal to low-income illegal immigrants or how the state would even pay for it. Meantime, the federal Obamacare exchange continues to have problems. So how bad are they? Joining me now on the Daily Ledger, Page 5 beat Stephanie Marie.
Yeah, so they're pretty bad, and there's a troubling report out from the Government Accountability Office showing that the healthcare.gov website is vulnerable to fraud. The website is the federally maintained portal through which taxpayers purchase health insurance plans via government exchanges created as a part of Obamacare. Now, the GAO uncovered the fraud by submitting fake applications over the phone and online. The fake ones they signed up last year were automatically re-enrolled for 2015, and some were even rewarded with bigger taxpayer subsidies for their insurance premiums. The GAO says healthcare.gov's document processing contractor is not required to seek or detect fraud, which is a problem.
The marketplace approved subsidized coverage for 11 of our 12 fictitious applicants. These applicants obtained about $30,000 in total annual advanced premium tax credits, plus eligibility for lower costs at time of service. For 7 of the 11 applicants, we intentionally didn't submit all required verification documentation to the marketplace, but it didn't cancel coverage or reduce or eliminate subsidies for these applicants. I would note that while subsidies, including those granted to our applicants, are not directly to enrollees, they nevertheless represent a financial benefit to consumers and a cost to the government. As part of its verification process, the marketplace didn't accurately record all inconsistencies which occur when applicant information does not match information available from marketplace verification sources.
The GAO's investigation also uncovered a problem that bedevils millions of real people using healthcare.gov: confusing and inaccurate communication. Investigators say their bogus enrollees received unclear correspondence that failed to identify the problems with their applications. About 10 million are getting coverage this year through healthcare.gov and state health insurance markets.
Now, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services are accused of stonewalling the GAO. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so this was brought up during that Senate hearing that we just saw a clip from, and Republicans are saying that CMS was not cooperating with the investigation, that officials were dragging their feet, and the GAO office requested information on the actual enrollment numbers so they could investigate the scope of this fraud, and they still don't have that information today, and CMS says they're going to hand that over, but we'll have to wait and see.
What does this say about healthcare.gov?
I mean, this says a lot about healthcare.gov, and these problems aren't new. We know that healthcare.gov has been struggling for a while, and they've been trying to make changes and they've been trying to fix things, but obviously it's not working if they're able to create fake profiles and, get this far with it and have taxpayer subsidies returned. It's ridiculous, and they need to do more to protect the taxpayers, and, this puts our information at risk.
So what else do you have for us, Steph?
Who is on American money? Apparently, there are Americans who don't know. With all the talk of some of the faces on those bills being replaced with women and minorities, the Media Research Center thought it would be interesting to go out and see if people knew the names of the historical figures who are currently enshrined on our American currency. Reporter Dan Joseph hit the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and he also made a stop at George Mason University in Northern Virginia. The responses he got are shocking.
You have money, right? You spend cash.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna show you some pictures, and I want you to tell me if you know who these people are. Do you know who this guy is?
Actually, I don't. George Adams?
George Adams.
I don't know.
Okay, what are you studying?
Economics.
All right, then you should know this. Who's that guy on the $10 bill?
Well, that's Thomas Jefferson, right?
No.
I mean,
Is it? No.
Who's this first guy right here on the $10 bill?
Oh, gosh. Jefferson?
All right, don't worry about it.
I don't want to seem like an idiot.
Don't worry about that.
Wait, I know him.
I feel like I should know. Who is this guy?
Oh, crap. Thomas Jefferson?
No, that's actually not Thomas Jefferson. You guys have spent $10 bills.
Is that his name?
No, that's actually the Secretary of the Treasury. This guy's dead.
I know he's the president. Names don't come to me. Is that Thomas Jefferson?
No.
Van Buren?
That's an interesting guess, but wrong. Alexander Hamilton.
Oh, that's
He
right.
was
Okay.
actually Jefferson's worst enemy. They hated
Really?
each other.
Okay.
So the fact that you said Jefferson, he's probably rolling over in his grave right now.
Dan Joseph tells me they interviewed about 20 people, and out of the 20, only one person got every single answer right.
How do Americans not know who's on the bills they handle every day?
Yeah, you know, that's something I was wondering, and I actually asked Dan Joseph what he thought about it, since he's the one who went out there and interviewed these people, and he said that young people just aren't interested in civics or current events these days, and he's blaming our education system, saying that our students are deprived of history lessons.
Okay, thank you, Steph. Coming up next, Republican presidential candidate Scott Walker in the crosshairs of the mainstream media as the Daily Ledger continues. Page 6 now, the 2016 race for president. On the Democrat side, Hillary Clinton is having a little trouble with her base this week. Members of the American Federation of Teachers are demanding the union withdraw its endorsement of Hillary, calling it premature and undemocratic. And at a town hall meeting in New Hampshire, she got heckled by a climate change activist.
Wait just a minute, dear. Wait a minute. Well, no, wait. That's okay. I am all in favor of acting on climate. You know what? I have said in this campaign, I'm going to tell you what I believe.
Meantime, there may be more trouble ahead for Hillary, but this time in Iowa. Joining me now from Washington, D.C., Inside the Beltway columnist at the Washington Times, Jennifer Harper. Welcome to the show. So what kind of problems is Hillary facing in Iowa?
Well, she's facing all kinds of problems this week, not only from the AFT. Now, we have to look at Iowa this week because they have an unprecedented amount of presidential hopefuls from both sides of the aisle out there in the Hawkeye state. There are 10 GOP presidential hopefuls out there. They're assembling in Ames for the Family Federation Summit, which is going to talk about grassroots values and faith and family. But more importantly, there are 5 Democratic presidential hopefuls down in Cedar Rapids. They're there for the Iowa Democratic Party to kind of talk up the Iowa Hall of Fame. And Mrs. Clinton is being greeted by a number of polls that are very significant and very telling. And leading the pack is a new poll from the Associated Press, which reveals that half of the voters, this is across the board, half of the voters do not approve of Mrs. Clinton anymore. And they also asked about those kind of esoteric and emotional things. Is she trustworthy? Is she inspiring? Is she compassionate? Sorry, across the board, sometimes with results as high as 61%, Wendy, they're saying, no, Mrs. Clinton is not trustworthy. She's not compassionate. She doesn't inspire me. I don't even think she's competent. And also, one more poll, I got to bring it up. This is coming from a Vox poll, which actually asked the respondents, if you had to pick between Hillary Clinton and a Republican nominee, who would you pick? 50% said the Republican nominee, and only 42% went for Mrs. Clinton. And also in that same poll, Joe Biden beat Mrs. Clinton in this poll. So again, not a very good week for Mrs. Clinton.
Well, speaking of Republican nominees and Republican candidates, let's talk about the media attack on Scott Walker and his counterattack.
Yeah, you have to think of the fact the minute he got on stage to announce that he was running for president, the Democrats and the mainstream media were after Mr. Walker almost as soon as he got off the stage. In fact, the Democratic National Committee has already launched a petition against Mr. Walker. A lot of the media people are saying he's awkward, he's not ready for prime time, he doesn't have any foreign policy experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, guess what? This is a man to be reckoned with. He has pushed right back. In fact, the very first thing that Scott Walker said when he walked out on that stage to declare he was running for the White House was, "I love America." He also said things like, "I'm a Harley guy and I'm running for president." So he's a guy to be reckoned with, but he's also pushing back very publicly against the White House, using very, very strong language. He's accusing the White House of being the imperial presidency, of creating a culture of corruption in Washington. I mean, the man goes on. You got to give him credit. And last but not least, Wendy, he has started today, as we speak almost, a tour of 6 different Iowa counties in a Winnebago. Now talk about grassroots appeal. That's Scott Walker, and he's definitely got a campaign to watch.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about sanctuary cities. What do voters think about that?
Well, this brings us back to another Republican hopeful, and that would be Rick Perry. And for years and years, he has complained that the 200 sanctuary cities in the United States, these are the cities that grant a sanctuary for illegal immigrants. He has a big problem with that. He thinks that federal funds should be withdrawn from these cities. He even calls for some legal action against them, and he has warned that they are also creating more crime in America because sometimes they're overlooking the criminals that are coming in with a lot of immigrant workers. So you got to wonder, well, what do voters think of that? And amazingly enough, voters are agreeing with Rick Perry on this. This is coming from a Rasmussen Reports poll. In fact, 62% of the voters across the board are saying they believe that the federal government, actually the Justice Department, should prosecute, bring legal action against these sanctuary cities, and another 6 out of 10 are saying that they should have their federal funds withdrawn. So Mr. Perry has made a big point, and that has resonated with voters, and something to watch in his campaign as well.
That's right. Now we know that Republicans are pushing back on this idea of this imperial presidency. What can you tell me about that?
Well, in a sense, this week, they push back about the imperial presidency all the time, but this week it's been the Iran deal, the U.S. nuclear accord with Iran, that they're having a problem with. Another number of the lawmakers are saying that you didn't run any of this by us, and what is Iran going to comply with all of this? And what about the prisoners, United States prisoners who are still left in Iran? And they're pushing back. But again, we go to the voters and another one of these polls where they're indicating that, my gosh, the voters agree here that Congress should have approval of this negotiation with Iran before it goes anywhere. Again, we go back to our friends at Rasmussen Reports poll, and they're finding out about 2/3 of the voters, and a way higher group of Republicans feel this way as well, that the White House can't go forward with this without the approval of Congress. So again, we have the United States voters going, looks like the presidency is working here without consulting Congress, and they're worried about it.
Jennifer, thank you for joining us. Coming up next, the devastating fallout from mental illness and guns as the Daily Ledger continues. Welcome to the back page. Some final thoughts now. Yesterday, a jury found Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooter James Holmes guilty of murder. The shooting spree at the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises began when Holmes, dressed in combat gear and armed to the hilt, took the theater by storm when, having entered previously with a ticket through the front door, re-entered through an emergency exit and opened fire. The question for the jury was not whether James Holmes was the shooter. The trial was not a whodunit. It was a what is it, madness or murder? The jury chose the latter. But the Holmes trial highlighted yet again the tragic results that can stem from untreated mental illness. More specifically, the dangerous mix of mental illness and guns. Holmes was an intelligent young man struggling with a mental disorder. We have suffered through other heartbreaking cases of murderers suffering through mental issues, such as Adam Lanza, who committed the Sandy Hook massacre, and Elliot Rodger, who opened fire in a Santa Barbara college neighborhood. Understandably, people are concerned that too often individuals who are silently suffering from untreated mental issues are walking among us, often carrying guns, which they have legally acquired. The stigma of seeking help for mental issues is a barrier in many cases, often as a result of negative stereotypes. Even people who are struggling with homicidal thoughts do not seek help as often or as quickly as we would like. Friends and family members who are witnessing mental struggles over loved ones are afraid to speak out. As a society, we are committed to public safety. Let us remember the mantra branded after 9/11. If you see something, say something. By working together and paying attention to the needs and behaviors of the people around us, we can work towards a safer community for ourselves and our loved ones. This edition of the Daily Ledger is now on its way to the archives of the Library of Congress. Thank you for watching. I'm Wendy Patrick. Have a good night.